My name is Elisabeth Richard. I'm the Director of Civil Society Relations at NG. I was also appointed by the government as a member of the High Council of Gender Equality, le Haut Conseil à l'égalité, with my friend Catherine. It's my honor to moderate this roundtable discussion today on negotiation with these three incredible women. Thank you for accepting this invitation. But before we begin, I would like to share a little anecdote that is not really an anecdote. It happened 4 years ago to a friend of mine. She was the CFO of an artificial intelligence company in San Francisco and had to leave the US to follow her husband, who had been transferred to London. She's brilliant and speaks 5 languages. Upon arriving in London, she was quickly approached by a great AI company. She had interviews and finally met the CEO, with whom she had a great fit. He told her that he wanted her to take the position and promised to make her a financial offer within 2 days. She received the package, which was particularly low. This surprised her. So she searched LinkedIn for former CFOs of the company. She eventually got in touch with an ex-CFO who made her understand that he earned much more a few years ago. She then decided to contact the CEO and tell him that she was thrilled to join this company, but was surprised by the low salary compared to the position and assumed that it was also the case for her predecessor. As CFO, she would have perfect access to the accounts and therefore the salaries of the employees, including her predecessor. Guess what? An hour later, she received a new financial proposal that had simply doubled. Isn't it incredible? It's a true story. Before we dive into specific areas of negotiation, let's explore some underlying factors of why women are generally uncomfortable negotiating. Negotiating can be a challenging experience, and there are underlying beliefs, self-worth, fear, and habitual patterns that can make it more difficult for women. How can we overcome these barriers? And what are some tips for negotiating more effectively? They will tell you. We will move as well on 2 specific areas of negotiation, starting with negotiating for salaries and promotions. This is an area where women have historically been at a real disadvantage. So what lessons can we learn from past experience, and how can we negotiate more effectively in the future? We will turn our attention to the Arab cultural context as well. There are unspoken challenges that some women face in the workplace, such as feminine energy being seen as too soft or too bossy. In France, we say too ambitious. Industry-specific challenges, motherhood, well-being, life balance, and sexual harassment. How can we navigate these challenges and use our unique skills and history to be great negotiators and empower other young women and men? And what are some ways we can bridge the gap, such as self-exploration with support from an executive coach or a trusted mentor? What works and what doesn't work? will be presented by a stellar group of seasoned executives for whom negotiations are a significant part of their work, much of which has been conducted in different countries during their exceptional careers. Let's start with you, Marie-Hélène Ben-Sadoun. Marie-Hélène, you're a partner in the employment law group at Auguste Debussy in France. You, as someone who has extensive experience in employment and social security-related disputes, you assist employers with their negotiations with staff representatives and trade unions, redundancy plans, employee incentive plans, compensations packages, as well as mass litigation. You're one of the best in France. You are as well involved in many NGOs for girls and against racism and anti-Semitism. Marie-Hélène, could you tell us about some of underlying basic factors of why women are generally uncomfortable negotiating? What is negotiation for women, and what challenges do they face in the process? As a lawyer, how do you approach negotiation, and are there any inspiring women in this field that you would like to mention? In fact, do you think that it's more difficult to negotiate when you're a woman? Thank you, Marie-Hélène.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks to Irene and Elizabeth for inviting me to share my experience in negotiation on the occasion of this wonderful summit among so brilliant panelists and delegates. I'm very grateful and proud of that, and also very impressed. You are all very impressive. So, I will be very cash with you because I have only 10 minutes to convince you that women are the best to negotiate, that women have no difficulties to negotiate, and there is no special way for women to negotiate. So I would like to convince you today. The difficulty is only in the fact that it's only in the prejudice that we have to breach. What are these prejudices? The idea that the game is higher for a woman than for a man. The stupid idea that a woman is less tenacious than a man. The more stupid idea that if she is as tenacious as a man, she is not a real woman. And the idea that she won't have enough resolution. So, as women, we have to work more than men because we have to break down the prejudices that I mentioned above. So, we have to work on how to convince there is no difference between men and women and men in negotiation, and sometimes we have to convince men who are not used to receiving contradiction by women that they will have to adapt and to accept to move the lines. So, what is the best weapon we have? It's the anticipation. Negotiation is knowing what I want to achieve and what I will have to give up. Negotiation is knowing where am I and how far I want or I can to go. So a good preparation is really necessary. The good preparation is to have a very, very clear idea about who is around the table, my partner, because sometimes I have to negotiate with people I have to assist to explain to them that their position is not a good position. So it's the first step of the negotiation. Sometimes I say my customer are my best enemies in the negotiation. And after, my opponent, it's very important to know them before coming around the table of negotiation. I negotiate for 25 years against trade union and trade unionists. So I know certain trade unionists as my best enemies, and sometimes we have very, very strong discussion, and we take a coffee after the negotiation. But every time I have to enter into a room of negotiation, I have to think about who is around the table, who is his personality, what agreements they did have before, because it gives me an idea of what they can accept or deny. And also, because I'm against trade unionists, what are the positions, what are the political or social positions they adopt in the time of the negotiation, because it may be changed. The other point, which is very, very important, I may negotiate with the clear idea of the impact that what I have negotiating will have at more or less long term. The weapons I use are a good awareness of my strength and my weakness, the acceptance of the compromise, the acceptance of listening the others, because sometimes they are not necessarily wrong, and a strong force of conviction that I learned during my experience before acting as a lawyer before the judge. The judge has it's a good example, and it's a good manner to know exactly what is your force of conviction. What should absolutely didn't avoid? And I see that I forgot to put my, I'm sorry. Okay. What I have to avoid? Try to obtain something with the desire to seduce. I'm not have to be loved, but to obtain an acceptable compromise. I use honesty, transparency, sincerity, but I'm not naive. I try to avoid confrontation, but I express my confidence in what I stand for. And finally, I try to forget my personal meanings as a spouse, as a mother, as a manager. When I have around the table of negotiation, I only think about my goals, my skills. So, what is the recipe? There is a recipe that I can give you in few minutes. As you can note, I will respond to your question, of course, and I would like to speak. I'm sorry. The more principle, my French inspiring women. Women who are role model for me, and I think about them every time I'm around the table. Gisèle Halimi, which is, as me, a lawyer, and which is really a role model for the people, for the lawyers, as for my generation. Simone Veil, which is a Shoah survivor and who was the health minister, passed in 1975 the law that legalized abortion. Nikit Saint-Phal, which is a very famous artist and who has the force to work in a scope where men were present, which is the monumental sculpture. And then people that I know and who are my friends, Delphine Ernotte, which is the CEO of France Télévisions and president of the European Broadcasting Union, which is a stronger negotiator. Tina Kiefer, which is a French journalist who created a school in Cambodia and to permit to the girl to access to the education, and Esther Duflo, that you will know, I'm sure you know, which is a Nobel Prize in Economic Science.
Thank you, Marie-Hélène. So keep your questions for afterwards. I wish we knew Simone Weil a few years ago, and yes, you're right, those women were great and are great negotiators. Now I'd like to speak about and invite you, Najwa. Najwa, you are a member of the C-suite of a leading UAE government entity and the founder of the Women Lawyers Group Middle East. You were selected to the legal 500 GC Power List Middle East in 2019 and were listed as one of the women of influence in the Arab world in, listen to that, 2021, 2022, and 2023. I think we can give a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
Najwa, as an international corporate attorney with extensive experience in corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, investment firms, private equity and dispute resolution, what do you understand negotiation skills and techniques to compromise of? What are key lessons learned from bad negotiation? And what happens when you need to come up with a plan B during a negotiation? And finally, tell us about negotiating across different cultures with a focus on the Arab culture, and what tips do you have for women negotiating in different contexts? Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased and honored to be in this room with many inspiring, successful women and gentlemen. I look forward to this discussion, and I hope you will find my remarks and those of my colleagues helpful and relevant to what you do in your profession and also in life in general. So let me start by asking, who doesn't want to be a more effective influencer or negotiator? We all do. And as a lawyer, I do this on a daily basis because when I'm not haggling, the other side or my clients in a potentially adversarial situation, I am often needing to persuade family members or colleagues or members people in my circle of my point of view. And even though the two things may seem at first or appear to be requiring different skills, there are very many competitive techniques that are involved in both, and that we can all use to be a more effective negotiator. And by saying that, I namely mean learning to build rapport and trust to bring people over to our way of thinking. Also using different techniques to nudge those who disagree with you to become in a position where they are more receptive to listening to your point of view, and also realizing the reasons that sometimes lead us to a deadlock in negotiations, and learn how to exchange information and lead to a win-win situation, because a successful negotiation at the end of the day is a win-win scenario where both sides realize their goals and benefit from the whole experience and build a long-term relationship. So if we were to talk about the skills and techniques that are required for a successful negotiation, my previous panelist mentioned preparation, and I can't stress enough the importance of planning ahead. And this even starts before going to the negotiation table. Try to have small talk, find common interests with the counterparty so that you humanize the experience and limit antagonism and the possibility of bad negotiation. Effective communication is also key. And by that, I mean become an active listener. Ask open-ended questions. Stay away from closed questions where the answer is a yes or a no. You want to engage with the other side. You want to get as much information as you can when negotiating. Emotional intelligence is also very, very crucial, because emotions they play a key role in negotiations, for better or for worse. And it's important to learn how to use and manage emotions to your advantage. Also, value creation. So instead of being concerned of really getting the biggest slice of the pie, think of growing, the whole pie, so that both sides will benefit at the end of, the negotiation experience. How can we avoid bad negotiations? I think you need to build trust and rapport, so you establish common grounds and focus on what's the areas where you agree. You, as I said, need to communicate clearly. You have to understand and research the interests and the goals of the counterparty, and you also need to learn how to manage emotions and conflict in a positive way. So you need to learn to de-escalate and also put yourself in the shoes of the other side to better understand what they are looking for, and again to lead to this win-win situation. If we talk about negotiating in the Arab culture, and maybe by way of a background, I'm an Arab American lawyer, and I've been a corporate and investment lawyer for many, many years, negotiating investments done globally. And I will tell you that the cultural differences bring a dimension to any negotiation, because there is the language barrier, different body language, a different way of expressing emotions. So it is very, very important when you are negotiating with people who come from a different culture to really spend time studying the norms and values of that culture to a certain extent, to help you, come across as someone who is respectful and someone who understands the very important aspects of this new culture. In the Arab culture, I would say it's very important to come across as respectful. Also very, very important to understand that as Arabs, we sometimes prefer the indirect message as opposed to, confrontation and very direct message. We're very emotional people, so we are by nature very expressive. So it's very important also to have eye contact. We like that. We also approach negotiation with a 360 holistic, approach. And in a 360 approach, there is always the element of emotion, of bargaining, So also it's important to build a relationship with the people you are negotiating with in the Arab world. So just as when I go abroad, I try to remember, birthdays of lawyers who are sitting on the other side of the table. When they come over, I invite them over to my, house to have a lunch or a dinner together and build a relationship, because at the end of the day, it's human interaction. It's really the relationship that counts. And these things help when you are, doing business in the Arab world. Just a couple of minutes for very, very few tips when you are negotiating as women in different contexts, whether it's in your life or job or selling property, buying a car, whatever it is. Try always to just be you, genuinely you, and do a self-assessment of your strengths and weaknesses, and do this regularly. I do this on a regular basis, because you will reconnect with what your goals are, what your values are, and when you are comfortable in your own shoes, you will definitely be able to put this message across to people who are sitting across the table from you. Also, it's very important to seek feedback and seek advice from women and men in your own circle to make sure that you are doing what you are supposed to do and you are on the right path. Sometimes when you find yourself stuck in a deadlock or an impasse in a negotiation, it's good sometimes to change the venue, take a break, change the participants, and I have done that because when you change the participants, you bring a new perspective to the table. It's also very, very important to always remember that sometimes women are judged by their appearance, referees, experience, age, title, and in all honesty, it's not all bad. I think it's just important to manage to what extent this is the criteria by which you are being judged. And also, as I said, just be yourself, listen carefully to what is meant and not just what is said. And all keep in the back of your mind that even though as a woman in a male-dominant sector like my sector, there are drawbacks, but in all honesty, to be underestimated is a very powerful position in a negotiation because in so many examples in my professional life, I found that I did achieve my attainable goal without even my opponent realizing it. So don't underestimate. I mean, it's okay to be underestimated when you're negotiating. Okay, I hope this is helpful. I look forward to the questions and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Najwa. Najwa, I'm not sure, for example, in France, so it's very interesting to have different culture and to compare and to share those experiences, but I'm not sure, Marie-Hélène, you tell me, if we say happy birthday to Laurent Berger, the most powerful man of a trade union, he will be happy and it will help, but I don't know. So I'd like now to invite Salam Atwi, our final great woman. You are General Counsel and partner at EY Mene in Lebanon and UAE. Salam, you are a global business partner, professional litigator, a specialist in regulatory compliance, governance, corporate contracts, transactions, employment and disputes, and eventually you are a visionary leader. Salam, if you were to further explore some of the underlying factors of why women are generally uncomfortable negotiating, what, in your experience, is at the root of this discomfort, and how does that show in negotiating for salaries and promotions? Under specific Arab cultural context, women may have a relatively shorter history in negotiation experience, at least in the corporate world. How, in your experience, can we bridge that gap faster? And finally, what, in your experience, living between the East and the West, may be key unspoken challenges that some women face in the workplace, and how to navigate those? Thank you, Salam.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. As Elizabeth said, I lead a legal department at Ernst & Young for MENA region. And on my team, there's mostly women, and I find them to be the best negotiators for a lot of reasons, but also the underlying factors that I've seen in my team, in myself, and in others while negotiating, women in particular, are a common thread, not necessarily just in the Arab world, but maybe perhaps more prominently so, but also in other regions. Can I put the slides up, please? Thank you. So, if I were to do an experiment of some sort and ask all of you, if you really think about it, the question is, how many times in your life have you put yourself last or have not put yourself first when it comes to taking care of others? By raise of hand. I've heard from the audience that I'm always last. This is a typical stance for women. And from that, if you ask where am I going with this, if we put ourselves last, if it comes to negotiating my salary or my partnership for that matter, I'm never used to putting myself first. So I don't know how to speak for myself. But if my son, my friend, my colleague, my business were to ask me to represent them, I have a superwoman syndrome. Suddenly, I'm the best at negotiating. Suddenly, I'm able to turn the tables around, give the best advice, be the best hero to get you the best deal. So what is it that I'm missing here? If you close your eyes, go with me on this one. Everybody, please, close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and out. Within you, there's a small child who is you, who's learned as she or he were growing up that it's okay to put herself last, that she'd be a good girl or boy if she managed others better than herself. So she learned that she's a good girl when she does things for her caregivers, parents, family, friends, you name it. Then that little girl or boy, that little child has learned to step away from the limelight, has learned not to have a voice, or has learned that at least their voice is not necessarily highest up on the hierarchy. And that pattern goes on until this day. We're sitting at this table. If you really think about how many things you have to do, how many things that you need to take care of, our families at home, taking care of business while we're sitting here at a women's conference, all of this. And the last, maybe you've asked yourself, what is it that I have taken care of for myself recently? Now try to answer that question. When was the last time I prioritized my self-care? You can open your eyes. Probably the answer is rarely. And when I come to the table to ask myself to negotiate for myself, I don't have the tools. I don't have the practice. I haven't looked at myself and I said, what am I worth? We know we're the fixers, we're the caregivers, we're the great negotiators for our companies, but what is it is for us? And in my experience, as much as I have 20 plus years of experience, when I came to the table to negotiate my partnership, I didn't have the words for it. I had to lean on 2 executive coaches and my husband pushing me to say the words, I want to be a partner. Why is my voice suddenly so small? Where is all the greatness that I had suddenly gone? And all the thought in my, well, they know. They know. I do great. They know. This is another thing that women, unfortunately, think. I do great things. They should know. Irene said, they don't know how great you are. They don't. So I don't even say it to myself. They know. I do all of these things. They should know I want my partnership. Nobody knew when I brought it up to my line manager, who happens to be the CEO. He was like, yes, do you want it this year or next year? This year! And it wasn't okay. And it went ahead. And it was, for me, to this day, I was like, oh my God, I built this monster in my head, thinking of so many things. And then when I spoke it out, believe it or not, if he had said no, at least I've been comfortable that I spoke up. Speaking up for this little girl within me made me a better negotiator, made me really feel that this is where I can have the power. So we're going a little bit into a psychological level of being a good negotiator and knowing your value, your self-worth, in particularly in promotions or salary increases or new roles is super important to have. So that's one psychological aspect that I'd like to think that is at the root of successful negotiations, at least in my experience. Now, I mean, men have been in the corporate world for such a long time. I don't think women have not been in the negotiation field for such a long time. I think we're original negotiations. As Najra said, I can get to a point without my counterpart believing or seeing it coming. And I think we have enough of talent, enough of experience and history, enough complexity, dare I say, in our genes as well as in our life to be able to be great negotiators. I absolutely agree with Mary-Hélène that there is no difference when it comes to capability of negotiating. There is a difference when it comes to genetic composition, although that's controversial these days, but I do think that we have a different set of skills that we can use, and that set of skills helps us to become even better negotiators, the greatest negotiators, and not to compare with our counterparts, or males or females, just to compare with ourselves. We need to look and see that as something to be aware of. And that's when it comes to what's our secret weapon. We have a lot of secret weapons. But I believe one of the most important secret weapons we have in negotiations is emotional intelligence. You've probably seen one of those TikToks that, men have sort of a linear, stable life when it comes to hormonal changes. Women, I believe, due to complexity of genetic and richness of that genetics, have a complex hormonal changes over life. And that doesn't make us less, it makes us richer. And we can use that to be better negotiators. We actually are able to grasp so many aspects of the same thing at the same time. Have you ever been in a conversation, no offense to all male parties in the audience, but with your partner or somebody and saying, you need to do this and this and this, and you're able to just grasp a whole list of things, while sometimes, again, some males, I speak for my husband, whenever I tell him one or two things, he's overwhelmed already. And I have hundreds on my list, trust me, hundreds. So we're able to grasp everything that my colleagues have said, able to scan the table, understand the emotional sense, understand the political context of what's going on. Maybe speak less, but know exactly what you're aiming for and how to get there. And that is really one of the best secret weapons we can utilize to be better negotiators. I won't tell you about a story that Irene told me, but do ask her, what is it about ex-President Mubarak and you trying to get the best out of something at a goal, and you went through the wife and tried to get there. So we're able to manage, and we say in Arabic, and I'm sure there's the same saying in English, وراء كل رجل عظيم امرأة, meaning behind every great man there's a woman. And I truly believe that. So thank you. We've been in that realm for quite some time. Now we're at the forefront, but we haven't been out of the battle for such a long time. The last thing I would like to say, and I'll give you a little bit of a story. Thank you. It's a little bit of a controversial photo for some. I won't step into that muddy water. I'll just steer away from that. I'll just say, when I was a young trainee in Lebanon, there were limited places for lawyers, particularly females at my time. And I had secured a spot at this law firm with a very prominent owner who's been also an ex-political figure, very old in age, meaning 85 plus. And I was so happy that I secured a place because part of my training, if I don't have a law office who can give me a room, I can't really progress with my training for lawyers. And I was a few weeks into this law firm, and I went to the kitchen, and the kitchen was very narrow and small, and I wanted to make myself a cup of coffee. And I went and I was doing coffee, and suddenly the owner, Mr. Smith, let's say, comes into the room, into the kitchen, and wants something. He's just bottling around wanting something. And I just try to squeeze out of it, but it's really the narrow, very narrow. So as he, and then he wanted to go out as well at the same time. So as he narrowed himself out and I'm out, he's like brushed against my breast in a way which was like a little bit, he was just like looking around as if he's disoriented. And I'm young, I'm like, he's old, it couldn't be like I didn't know what sexual harassment was, but something felt off, but I just felt like, no, he's just disoriented. No man is disoriented when it comes to me. So it happened another time. And that time, there was no disorientation about it. So I was like, this is absolutely on purpose. So how do I negotiate myself? I knew that I don't want to be I'm very competitive. I want to be on my career path. I don't want to be out of a job. There was no way. This was way before any Me Too. Again, this is in Lebanon. My parents would never, ever have even heard the words, if somebody's just brushing against my chest, it's just absolutely not something of a conversation to have. But I needed the job. So I stopped drinking coffee. I stopped going to the kitchen. I kept my steps and kept where I go away from that person. At the same time, I started looking for another law firm. A few months later, I got a firm position, another law firm. I went in to the owner's office, and I sat with him, and I told him that I found a different law firm, that I'd like to move my training to that law firm, and I'd like that to be happening in the next 2 weeks, but I need a 1 week until I finish. And I expect him that he does that because I also know that and this is what I told him, you brushed yourself against me in the kitchen. I knew that was happening. You should be very happy that I didn't go to the Lawyers Association. I wouldn't have gone, but I just said it. But I just want to tell you that I am aware of what you've done, and it's something that I will keep with me, but I wish that you will never, ever do this again. And if I knew that this will happen with some other women, then I find myself having to go to the Lawyers Association. Thank you very much, and goodbye. The one thing that I want to tell you, this is not the first, certainly it wasn't the last time I found myself in challenging situations. So women have to negotiate themselves in situations that are much more difficult than men. Maybe other men as well. But in that context, in environments, and not necessarily just in Lebanon, as women embark in MENA, in the Middle East and North Africa, into the corporate world, they might find themselves in places, situations where maybe the rule of thumb would say, you should speak up, or you should do this. We don't necessarily find solutions in just speaking up. Sometimes we need to negotiate ourselves out of a situation or into a new situation in a way that makes sense to our personality, our environment, and to our self-worth. I felt speaking up, even if it took me some time, gave me that confidence to really go into the corporate world feeling that I do have muscles, that I can find my way around that. And since then, the last thing I want to end with this, since then, I've had so many people support me in negotiating my position at any place. Male more than female, believe it or not. And which brings me to the last point that I'd like to make today, is that, women empowerment is absolutely important, but we are bigger than just feminism. We are leaders, we're caregivers of societies. We have such a big role to bring up not only our women, fellow colleagues, daughters, friends, but also our fellow men, our fellow fathers and sons. We have a greater power to use that muscle to empower more women and to bring society to an interdependent place where Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen master, would say interdependence is the place where you want to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Do you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Salam. Very interesting. I like the male disorientation business case. I will keep it in mind, and when we'll have young women at work, we will start with that. I wanted to ask you all three two questions. One is, what is your mantra? And the second question, you are where you are. How did you negotiate to succeed in your professional life? Do you want to start, Marie-Hélène or Najwa? You tell me.
Maybe with the mantra, every time I go in the table of the negotiation, I think about a song of the American singer Cher, and I say, I'm strong enough.
Thank you. My mantra is something I'm learning still. And most of the time, I find myself telling myself how bad it is for me. I have thoughts of victimhood. I could wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, I didn't sleep. My son woke me up, the dog woke me up, I have such a bad day, I'm so fatigued, I still have to go with it, so I just put on and move on. And I've learned, I am still learning, that changing that mantra in the head from a victim to a victor, as Joel Osteen would say, changes my whole negotiation stance when it comes to living life. And I am learning that life is beautiful when you unfold with its energy, not when you battle it. The one thing that I would say is go with the flow. My mantra is be a victim, not a victor. You can make your story. Thank you.
Thank you. It's beautiful. Najwa, what's your mantra?
Hello? It's working? Okay. Hi. So, I am a runner. And I grew up in Kuwait and moved to New York City to go to Columbia Law School many years back. And when I reached New York, I was very, very overwhelmed with, the big city, Manhattan, living in the middle of Manhattan, going to Columbia Law School. In the building, the neighbor doesn't say good morning. People are very busy. The pace is very fast. So my first escape was to just walk out of my building, turn left, and go into Central Park and start running. So with time, I became a very, very avid runner and started doing marathons. And by running marathons, my mantra became, I can, I can, I can. And I say it to myself 3 times in the morning, many times during the day, and also at night, because when you do long distance running, your body is by mile 13, if you're running a marathon, you're completely in pain, aching everywhere. So it is the perseverance, it's your head, your mental power that keeps you going. So I tell myself, I can, I can, I can. And I think it's also very important to wake up every morning and say, the sky is the limit. I can fly high, and I am happy, and it is going to be a great day. And I totally believe that when you do these things on daily basis, you really start becoming more productive, happier, and this positive energy is very contagious. And when you're negotiating, you need that. You need very open body language, when you're sitting across the table from the counterparty.
Thank you, Najwa. Yes, the sky is the limit. I think it's a good mantra as well. Marie-Hélène, how did you negotiate to succeed in your life, professional life?
In my professional life, it has been quite easy for me. Maybe because when I was a little girl, my parents tell that it was in my DNA. I negotiate for the color of my shoes, for the taste of the food. So it's difficult to give you an answer. I think that I was born as a negotiator. I love that. I think that loving what you do is important. I love to negotiate. So when I have to defend someone, I defend someone. Maybe I defend people best than me, but it's in my DNA.
Thank you. Salam?
Thank you. I have another story for you. When I was young, I took my younger siblings and their friends in the car to the beach. And while we were going, my car just broke down. So luckily there was a mechanic garage straight next to the place where it stops. So I went in, I asked him, I'm a girl, again, driving a car. So there was something wrong with it. And he said, well, it costs you $100. And, obviously I wanted to go to the beach and but I felt like, I'm a girl. I don't know what is wrong with the car. It could be a place of weak negotiations. Anyways, I paid the money. I did negotiate a little bit with him. He wouldn't go down. No, this is how much it costs, blah, blah. I paid the money. I went to the beach. When I went back to the office the next day, I was still a trainee lawyer. There were a few lawyers in the office, and I asked one of my colleagues, he was a trainee as well, he was like a little bit buff and youngish, and I said, and he knows about cars, so I said, this is what happened with me, and they changed this and that, and he like, how much does it cost? And he was like, around $10. I'm like, what? $10? He said, yeah, $10. He said, I told him, you know how much they charged me? $100. Like, really? I said, yeah. I said, can you come with me now? And he's like, yeah, I'll come with you. I took the guy, again, using muscles, negotiate from a place of strength. I don't have his muscles. I'm not a man. I can still use him. I took him, went to the mechanic. And mind you, this is a mechanic not in the best place of town. People are just wearing, a little bit filthy. And, there's 2 or 3 other colleagues of his or dudes in the mechanic garage sitting around and smoking, and we come in with this lawyer's suits, and then my friend, his name was Hassan, true story, he stands there, and I stand behind him, and I say, Mr. So-and-so, you charged me the other day for this $100. He's telling me that it's cost $10. I want my $90 back. And so that guy says, no. The mechanic says, no, but this is how much it cost me, blah, blah. He's just, he's stuck, but then he's standing up and he's all buff. He's all like a little bit with a big belly. And then Hussam, my friend, I'm now standing behind him. I start yelling, like crazy yelling. Neighbors from across the street start coming, and Hussam starts sweating because I'm just standing behind the guy, negotiating, I want my $90 back. He didn't know what he walked into, finding himself. Long story short, I got my $90 back. Now, Hussam doesn't like me anymore. But again, in negotiations, find the tools in my life. And I'm not saying Hussam is a tool, he's a support. He was a support for me. We could sometimes, but that's a different story. But in life, I found that the more I matured, the more I understood that it's not about being independent and doing it yourself. It's about asking for help. And beyond that, it's about asking for support. And beyond that, it is about understanding that I'm not alone in this world. I'm with great women, I'm with great men, and I can use everybody or can be part of this system to get where I want. So choose your battles carefully is the last thing I would say. I choose my battles of negotiation carefully. Thank you.
Najwa, how did you succeed?
So how did I succeed? it's not one story or one reason or one tool. I think it's a combination of so many things. But as Salam said, as we mature, you begin to see, you know, what works and what doesn't work. And I think also with time, I realized that it is not all about proving how skilled you are as a lawyer, because, you know, I was fortunate enough to get first class education and work really in many great jobs. But it's not just about being good technically at what you do. It's about working to develop your brain to make sure you keep an open mind when dealing, you know, with people, with situations, and at the same time taking good care of yourself, your body, your health, your well-being, your family. So it's a combination of all of that, I think. Definitely understanding your self-worth, and as I said, doing this self-assessment on regular basis to make sure you are, you know, standing and walking in the right path. I think also by, at least for myself, when we pray 5 times a day, and when you do that, you're grounded. There is, you know, this sense of faith and purpose that also helps me negotiate through difficult situations. So it's very important, I think, to take up. I learned from experience many years ago. I was negotiating a very important transaction with Bridgewater, which is the largest hedge fund in the USA. And the founder of Bridgewater, who's a very well-known investor called Ray Dalio, spoke to us about something called transcendental meditation. And he introduced it to us, and also, you know, had made a very nice gesture by bringing the guy who taught him transcendental meditation to Abu Dhabi to teach, you know, the group of us that were negotiating with Bridgewater. And this was about 17 years ago, and ever since then, I've been practicing transcendental meditation. I'm supposed to do it twice a day. I do it only once, and I have seen a big difference, because I think if you combine all these things, you know, sports, well-being, time with family, develop your brain, take good care of your health, do yoga, breathe, you can negotiate successfully, definitely.
Thank you very much. Before giving you the micro for questions, I have a little story of negotiation as far as I'm concerned. It's a long time ago. I had a small flat, and I had a big damage, water damage. And the insurance company was a friend of my father. And during months and months, I didn't receive any money, nothing. And I met my husband of today, and we decided to move. Okay, so I had to take another flat, so I had to give back the key to the owner of and with the problem of the water damage. So I called this friend of my father of the insurance, AXA, was a friend of, okay. And he said, "Oh, how are you, Elizabeth? How is your father?" Well, my father is fine, but I'm not fine because I still haven't received the money back, you know, and it's really big damage. And he said, "Yes, well, let me see, I call you back." Half an hour later, he called me back, and he said, "I'm sorry, but it's too late. We don't have, it's impossible." Like always, insurance. Okay. And I was working for the chairman of another company, and I went to see the assistant of this chairman during that day, and I listened to her. She was on the phone, and she said, "Okay, Mr. is going to the board of AXA this afternoon." Okay. I had an idea. Don't do it. Huh? So I came back in my office, took my phone, called a friend of my father. I said, "Well, Mr. Jones, don't worry. Maybe you might hear about my story, and so because my chairman is going to the board this afternoon with the big Mr. BBR at that time in AXA, so he might speak about my story, okay?" Okay. 15 minutes after, he called me back and said, okay, Elizabeth, I take on me, you'll be paid, no problems, you have the money back. Well, I didn't say anything to my chairman. I told him a few years afterwards. That's a story of negotiations, but don't do it. Huh? Okay, do you have any questions to these three incredible attorneys? Woo! Yes, there is a micro there. Thank you very much. Our Italian.
Hello? Okay. So I have to give my colleague who lives in Saudi Arabia some feedback. And I'm from the US and I'm very direct. So I'd love to hear just, some advice from you on how to give its constructive feedback. So I'd just love to hear that.
I can probably give a couple of tips. You're American? Okay. So Americans are very direct. And I think Nejma has already commented on the way we express ourselves and the way we expect to communicate with each other. And it's a little bit indirect. Not as indirect as the British. I don't know if you've ever seen the difference between communications with the American and the British. I think Saudis, as well as the GCC, and a little bit of the rest of the Levant, have a very trust/respect type of culture, a little bit on the East, also Eastern culture. So when we want to say, give a constructive feedback, it probably is best if you start with the things that they do well, obviously, and then say you do this better, and you could do it even better if you maybe try 1, 2, 3. So if you go to a person, and I found this to be very helpful with my teams. I had one team member a long time ago that was really doing so bad across so many, and he was Saudi, and I was really finding it difficult to communicate that to him. But to be honest, over time, and maybe this is just a twist to that question, is that I learned that sometimes my expectations are not necessarily the best for the job. And I learned that looking at that person and understanding their strength and what they're bringing to the table, is it at their edge or not, to come in to support them to flourish in what they can bring to the table, as opposed to my agenda or whatever I think this role should bring to the table. Of course, if it's not, if it's something you can afford. But really understanding that it's constructive feedback is about understanding the person's potential and just giving him a little bit more than his edge, but really supporting him in what he does best. One thing I remember, one of the Olympic coaches, one of the best Olympic coaches for gymnastics, I forgot his name, he used to, whenever his team would go on the roll and come back, every time they come back, he'd say, perfect job, amazing job. He would only give them compliments. The only time he would give constructive feedback was before they start a run. And he would say it this way. He wouldn't say, you did it that way, don't do it. No, he would say, as you go on, do this. So the feedback that is given to the person is given before he starts doing, in the form of guidance, and not in the form of do not do this, or you've done this badly this time, try to do this. And I'm still learning how to do this, but it's one of the best
pointers or advice on giving feedback. It's, even now when they give me the lead and I need to assess all my team, they do wonderful. They're gold standards all the time. I know exactly when to give the guidance before they start something new. After they've done it, it's done. They've done the efforts. It's very tough to wrap your head around it, not to say, oh my God, you could have done it this way or that way. Why did you do it this way? This is where Zen comes into play. This is where meditation comes into play. Don't say anything. I tell myself, shut your mouth, not the right time. The next time they're going to do something that I expect them to do, and I know their weakness, I try to give them pointers. Do this way. You are wonderful that way. Believe me, it works like magic. That's the piece of advice I give you in terms of feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may just add to this, just from my experience, after I graduated law school and I went into private practice as a very, very junior lawyer, I was devastated the first time I received feedback because it was very extremely direct. Nothing like nothing like the approach Salam described. And for your friend who's going to be, or who is in Saudi Arabia and working or negotiating in Saudi Arabia, it is very important to come across as respectful, polite, not overly polite to the extent where the message is clouded, but, polite, respectful, indirect. So instead of, how it is in the US, we always get down to business, get down to business. We get down to business in this part of the world, but we do it by using stories, metaphors to really convey the message and the point of view.
Thank you. Another question? Well, it's too high.
Too high.
Yeah.
Sorry. My name is Durre. I'm come from a technical background. I'm a developer. So my question is that after I applied to a job and I got in technical interviews and I passed that everything, and I got a technical offer in the last of process. So is that negotiable? Or they assess me technically and they got my abilities and they offer me on that level?
I can probably paraphrase and correct me if I'm wrong, but she applied for a job, she got through the interviews, she got to the point where she was offered the position and offered with a certain particular salary, right? So the question is, she feels that they've already assessed her competencies and whatever she's bringing to the table, and therefore they've assessed and given that a number and placed it on that offer. So the question is that what it is and there's no room for us negotiating, or is this the right time to negotiate?
I think that is always the good time to negotiate. So it's clear, and it's in line with what I explained before. I think that if you consider that you are in your right, you have to explain and to be cash. I think that we don't have, in a negotiation, we don't have to lose time. And if we feel we are in the right way and we are in the good line, we have to negotiate without waiting.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add something to, I think your friend was impressive because she went ahead and searched for the CFO, Elizabeth, right? The ex-CFO to find out how much she gets paid, or he would have gotten paid.
Yes.
This is one thing you can do. This role, do the research, find the market benchmark for that. Do your homework to know how much what you bring to the table is valued in market conditions. And
Worth of my value.
Yes.
Worth of
Yes, part of your value. So I think that part of the research, we miss a lot. Sometimes that thought of
it's
worth.
always important to have comparison. Exactly. So a benchmark is really, really important. So don't hesitate, even with another company, but at the same job,
Yes.
So don't hesitate to see if...
Yes. The underlying psychological aspect, again, I dig into psychology because this is where all the problems come from. The underlying is that we're used to, in our lives, be given the value or worth by other people. We can assess our own value. We're all worthy, we're all valuable. We just need to see it, and we believe in it, and not wait for somebody else to put a number. And to be honest, as a recruiter, yes, sometimes speaking to interviewees and candidates, the budget is set according to my assessment of that particular candidate. It's not like I have a benchmark. I'm like, okay, this is how I feel they're worth, depending on their experience. And this is biased, obviously, but this is the way I use it. But what comes across is different. Some women in particular come across, they have self-worth. They come across as they're not accepting of my assessment. And if I give them a number, they say, no, this is not what I am feeling. So my sense changes because of their confidence. That confidence comes from the underlying belief of how much they feel they're worth. So again, this is just a cycle of understanding that the underlying self-worth value is internal, and you reflect it. It's that energy that you bring off to the table. You asking, is this the right time? Did they already assess? Is a pattern that we all have growing up. They already assess, there's nothing I can do.
Salam.
Yeah.
And there is another thing is the women only use lawyers when they leave their job. Men are using lawyers when they take the job. So don't hesitate as well to use them. Isor?
Hi, thank you so much for this empowering panel. They sometimes say that negotiation is like a seduction. How do you do it when you've got that, ooh, I'm in, no, I'm not, and yes, and no, and yes, and what are the signs when you really got to start and put your foot down and get to the closing point?
Paraphrasing for the French. So as I understood the question, was that, sorry, what's your name? Lisa. Lisa's asking if... Isor is asking, when you come to the table of negotiating, particularly your salary, right? Or in the general sense of negotiating, when do you know? And it is, she mentioned that it's an art of seduction, and I believe what you meant by that is understanding that's an art. So getting that intuitive side of things to understand how can I maneuver creatively this context to get what I want, and when do I know that there's no way around it? That's it. I have cues to know it's stopped, and so I can't push more. What can tell me? Is that the question? Yeah.
Yes.
It's our employment partner.
Yes, it's quite difficult to answer quickly, but I think that when you prepare the negotiation very well before being around the table, you can know what are all the interests which are enforced. And sometimes you know that you are going to the table of the negotiation and you will not terminate the negotiation. You will not sign an agreement. I speak about labor law and negotiation with trade unions. Sometimes I go around the table and I know that we will not sign the agreement. But the way you deal with the negotiation will permit you another time to obtain an agreement. So it's difficult. Sometimes we have surprise because, and I agree with my two partners, we have a part of negotiation around the table, but we have also the off. And sometimes you obtain what you want because the off was very good, and you obtain a very good confidence with people speaking out of the table of negotiation. And sometimes you know at the principles that you will not obtain the agreement, but it's a little It's something which will, the negotiation will help you to find a solution in another step, in another negotiation.
Also, I think you need to be cognizant of, what the situation is. Is it an ultimatum where it's take it or leave it? Or is it that the opponent person is just bluffing you? Is just maybe exercising power or making you believe he or she has less or more information. So you need to be aware, and this takes us back to the point of preparing and doing research and planning ahead, because you need to understand the opponent's interests and goals and understand the options. Have your own criteria to be able to assess the outcomes and weigh the pros and cons. So if, for example, I'm sitting on the negotiating table and the person across from me is just, I feel, is bluffing, just, by reading certain verbal and non-verbal clues, when I'm able to detect that they are just bluffing and it's not really an ultimatum, I usually call them out politely by asking them to substantiate, the claims. Why is this the end of the road? And why are you claiming? Show me evidence, show me facts. And even if you find yourself in a situation where you're giving an ultimatum, just, sit back, breathe. And I think body language is very important. I don't cross my legs when I'm negotiating. I'm always sitting like this and, just relax and your shoulders down, and try to modify the ultimatum. Try to, make the opponent come back to the common grounds you have with them and focus on that instead of saying, okay, it's a take it or leave it. Let's try to think of how to modify it a bit so that both parties are happy and satisfied. And as I said, we reach the win-win scenario and a mutually acceptable agreement. So, and this comes with experience, Aizol.
Thank you, Najwa. Salam?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, sometimes, because partly in your question, you're assuming that there's a point where the other party is saying no. And maybe that's true in some of the cases. But in most cases, I would say, try to ask more questions. Don't, our thought process is sometimes not very truthful. It's murked with biases that we have, right? And triggers that our patterns can bring up. And so the way around that is to ask questions, understand why are they not moving on that point. So simply ask, what is the concern in that? So that's one way. Ask questions to try to understand where is this position coming from, and that can help you maneuver. And again, we're talking a lot about salaries, but obviously packages of negotiation include much more than salary, particularly for women, including flexibility, working from home, working from Honolulu, wherever you want to do. That's one part of it. So there are things that you come to the table with that you're willing to compromise off. And again, it's a set of factors. The last thing I would say, there's a term in negotiation. It doesn't come to me right now, but there's a book called Getting to Yes. And if anybody, I'm sure that a lot of people would know that. And you have to always go to the table knowing what is the lowest offer you're willing to accept. And that gives you a benchmark of what you're willing to take and what you're not willing to take. And I think that is a very strong stance to be in.
Thank you.
Sorry, and in addition to knowing, your walk-away point, you need to have your best alternative to an agreed, position. So always have an alternative, a best batna, exactly, the best alternative to this mutual agreement. Yeah.
The last question. Thank you. Thank you, Isa.
And if you need a lawyer, you also can have one. Pro bono.
You can hear me. Let's put ourselves in a situation where you want to close a really good client, or maybe if you close, it will be your biggest client, and everything is going really good. but you yourself or your team mentioned something that put something weird on the room, from the other party, from the decision maker person that is going to maybe sign your contract or not. Or the same on the other side, that you want really hard to close with them, but they mention something that is not really good with your values or whatever, and it gets like kind of weird situation. How can you get smartly from those situations that everybody's thinking about it, but nobody won't mention it, and you need to, as the head of the company, you need to do something to connect again with the client or to return to the point where you were before this point was mentioned.
So is it like sorry, what's your name?
Michelle.
Michelle, so is it like a sensitive point that was not brought into the table and suddenly brought in?
Maybe, let's say that someone of your team mentioned something and the CEO of the other company changed their face, the other party changed their faces, and it started to get weird.
Yes.
But nobody's mentioning anything.
Yes.
But as you are reading faces, how can you deal with it? Like, how can you take advantage of it or put you in a positive position, even though there's like obvious risk of signing in that moment? And tension.
Trade unions. So to paraphrase, you find yourself in the middle of a good-going negotiations, and suddenly something get dropped by either of the team and changes the whole atmosphere, and the positive target you saw coming to signature suddenly gets foggy. This is, with just paraphrasing with some of my language, but it gets foggy, and you lose the energy to get to that deal. That's what I got. You lose that sight of the signature and sealing the deal because something happened and the whole energy shifted. What do you do?
I try to speak with, if I advise the party who decide to change, I try really to understand if it's reasonable. Why we are now in this position. Sometimes, discussing with my clients, they take a position because sometimes they have, my client belong to a group, an American, US group, and they decide to change. So in that case, I have to understand exactly what happens. And sometimes there is no solution that to say, okay, we can go away because it's not possible. But before saying that it's not possible, I try to understand, and I try to convince that maybe the position adopted is not the good position. It's not the good one. And if it's not possible, next time.
I have to take a psychological aspect to this.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not a psychotherapist, a psychologist. I'm a mindfulness practitioner, by the way. So don't take my advice as a professional. Take it as just an experience. But in my comparison to how we feel sometimes as women, we try to move away from pain by doing something else. So when we find ourselves in a situation where somebody is in pain, we want to directly remove them from that pain because it's painful for us. So we want to move the conversation. A lot of times my son comes to me, he fell, I say, oh, look at the birdie. We shift the conversation instead of facing it with embrace to move away from a painful point and get back to a point where everything is flowery. And so in situations where, in negotiations where something has been dropped and it shifted the energy in the room, it's painful to sit and watch. You really want to get out of that and put yourself back on track. But I love what Marie-Hélène had said, because it is about understanding what happened. And instead of running away from that, from whatever happened and trying to cover it up, taking a pause and seeing what's happening. Why is this? There's something important for the energy to shift. And addressing that point, and facing that feeling, allowing that space for that feeling, as is things that we don't allow in ourselves, allow that space, actually could save you down the line, things that pop up that you would have otherwise confronted now, and not necessarily confronted in a bad way, but really assessed and given time for and embraced until you move it along to the path of where you were. So it's a great question.
Thank you for the last words. A big round of applause of those incredible lawyers. If you need the numbers, ask them, they are here for you. And next time, don't forget to have a lawyer behind you just to make sure that everything is well negotiated. Thank you very much.